Welcome back. Now this morning, right here on First Alert 4 On, we're joined by Dr. Clay Brigance for National Infertility Awareness Week. He's a licensed counselor, author, podcaster, and researcher. Doctor, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you, Megan.
Of course. Now, can you share a bit about your background and about Shiloh Counseling?
Yeah, absolutely. So as your viewers are watching, they're probably wondering why. Why is a guy really interested in infertility and how it affects couples? Well, my journey, Megan, it goes back to that question of why. So my wife and I, we started our infertility journey in 2017. And through that journey, there was this realization years after. We were on a date night, and I was looking at her, and I said, "Babe, I am more in love with you than I've ever been." And why? We went through all these medical procedures and loss and infertility and all of that, and we were just wondering why are we more in love now than ever. So that took me on this research journey to figure out why do some couples come together during infertility and why do some fall apart. So I got my PhD at UMSL right here in St. Louis, and I've had the honor of publishing a lot of research on why some couples come together, why some couples fall apart. I've researched over 1,000 couples through this journey, and it's been incredible. Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit about Shiloh Counseling? Yeah,
absolutely. So I started Shiloh Counseling literally, Megan, 9 days after I defended my dissertation. I was like, all right, we're ready, let's go for it. We're right on Clayton and Kerrs Mill in West County. And what I wanted to do, Megan, was start this a counseling practice focused on the mental health impacts of infertility, reproductive loss, which includes stillbirth, miscarriage, disrupted adoption, anything along that disrupted family building path, as a resource that my wife and I wish we would have had, So Shiloh Counseling's really blown up. We started with just me. We now have 10 clinicians in just 3 years, because there's just such a huge need for this.
And can you tell me about how infertility affects women differently from men?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, I just want to say this real quick, Megan. If you have viewers right now that are watching that are going through the infertility experience, and if they're female, they're probably wondering, what in the heck is my male partner thinking and feeling? Because men typically don't share their experiences. This is what in my research we call it well-intended chivalry, which is where men feel like they need to push down their own experiences in order to lift up their wife or their girlfriend. So men tend to be pretty quiet. But what the research shows is that around 40% of people, men and women, experience symptoms associated with PTSD. This is a research study that I did back in 2023. So a lot of that anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, in other words, like having those eyes like looking for the next shoe to drop, like when is my next disappointment coming? When is when is my body going to fail me? And it's very hard, and that's an understatement, for sure.
How common is this problem of infertility? How many people are going through this right now?
Yeah. So it's actually going up, Megan. So whenever my wife and I started through this process, it was the classic statistic, the 1 in 8. We would say, like, I am the 1 in 8. I'm the 1 in 8. But the CDC says it's not 1 in 6.
Wow.
And that's just in 8 years, 9 years. And in the United States, it's actually 1 in 5. So it's really going up, and so it's becoming more and more common.
How often would you say, or what time length, if a couple is trying to have a child, that you recommend they seek help from a doctor or other treatment?
Yeah. So funny thing. So we do have 2 miracle boys that shouldn't be here, but they are. And my oldest, when I defended my dissertation, I told him, I said, I'm a doctor now, kind of like your pediatrician, but for your feelings, it's kind of something different. And he said, Daddy, that's not a real doctor. So I want to tell your viewers, I have a PhD in counseling, not a medical degree, but what I can tell you, just from my experience, is check in on your fertility sooner than later.
Okay.
And medically, we define it as any failed attempts within a year if you're 34 or younger. If you're 35 or older, it's 6 months of failed attempts.
Is there anything else that you think would be important for our viewers to know who may be going through their own infertility journey?
Yes, 100%. I want your viewers to know, Megan, that they're not alone. There are resources out there. My website, drclaybrigance.com, has free resources. The podcast, Love and Infertility, that I've started with my co-host. Actually, we launched a new episode today where my wife and I share our story. So what I'm trying to do, Megan, is put these free resources out there for people that are navigating infertility like my wife and I did, so that they can know that they're not alone and that they can connect during their experience of infertility and also check in on their mental health.
Well, Clay, thank you so much for joining us here. Some very important stuff, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, even maybe going through their own infertility journey right now. Thank you so much for joining us today on the stream.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you.
Of course. Now stick with us. We're going to take a short break, but we'll see you back here in just a few.